awake, aware.
Well, maybe this is a good place to kind of get going then.
Yeah.
I so I became familiar with you through Christina Luna. I had her on my podcast, and she was talking about astrology and kind of how she got into that, and it involved a pretty significant sort of life breakdown. And she mentioned your name and you helping her kind of through some of her process, I believe. And so I kind of got familiar with your work and been following you for a little while. And I'm really intrigued by what you're doing because I had years ago. So I've worked in group homes with people with mental illness and developmental disability in the past. I did that for like 8 years, and um, it was always really fascinating to me and also a little bit scary. I've always been a person who's had this uh, deep underlying fear of losing my mind for whatever reason. Um, but one day I came across an article about the shamanic view of mental illness, and it really sort of resonated with me. It made a lot more sense than just, oh, these people are broken. So before I, you know, say too much, I'd like to just know about, Sacredphrenia, what you're kind of doing right now and how you got to be doing this sort of how you, came to your perspective and what you're trying to do with it.
Mm. Mm.
Just sort of like the backstory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for having me here, man. It's an honor. I mean, I love what you're doing, and I think in many ways our work is aligned because for me, Sacredphrenia is not just about transmuting what we call schizophrenia. It's about the big picture. Like, how can people who have gone through these difficult passages, how can they bring their gifts into the world, and how can they heal the world? Um, I think your podcast seems to be about healing in so many ways. Becoming awake and aware and alive. I mean, that's like the definition of being healthy and whole. So really, in many ways, that's what I've been attempting to do in my own way. I got dealt a difficult hand when I was about 19. I got really into spirituality. I dove very deep, very quickly. As soon as I got a taste of the mystical, it was like, what is that? I need to know more. And so I just plunged into it with my entire being. As I tend to do. I think I have a rather headstrong personality, or a rather intense personality at times. When I become interested in something, it becomes like my life. And so I got in over my head too quickly. I it was okay when I was learning about meditation and Alan Watts and the typical stuff that you find if you go to Barnes and Noble,
Mm-hmm.
the stuff you find on the bookshelf there. But when you start getting into conspiracy theories about the Illuminati, and you start getting into energetic arts that are causing your kundalini to rise up, and all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
forces can come together that can cause a real crisis. And so that is definitely what happened in my case. A number of factors came together to produce this storm that really took place practically overnight. It was like one day I was okay. I had my mind operating as it normally did, with some of that mystical energy involved, which made
Mm-hmm.
everything more interesting. But it wasn't like I was experiencing reality entirely differently than everybody else. But the next day, it was in April of 2010. I can even remember where I was. I was taking a hike. I was with my dog, a golden retriever, out in nature, and we were on this great hike. And all of a sudden, I just had a very dark thought, like I'd never experienced before. I mean, we all experience, depressing thoughts at times, but this was like this was like psychedelic. It was really, it had a weight to it. It had almost like an interdimensional quality to it, where it felt like it was like tugging on my soul. And yeah, it was terrifying. I mean, it definitely, it was a horrible feeling. And unfortunately, it just continued to intensify and accelerate until it was like my whole reality. And I was suddenly in this very dark place, you know, that many people, I'm sure, can relate with if they've had some type of mental breakdown. And it's different for each one of us. And I call it a mental breakdown, but it has so many spiritual components to it. And that's fortunately something that I held on to, you know, very early. I realized, well, there may be some psychiatric component to this, but there also seems to be a mystical component to this. And so I didn't fall for the conventional narrative. You know, I did go to a psychiatrist and I did get diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but I didn't buy it. I mean, my parents really wanted me to, you know, to consider that narrative, and to even consider going on the psychiatric medications and everything. But my gut told me to try something different. So what I ended up doing is really diving into holistic healing. You know, I explored eating, diet, like we were talking about a little bit ago, and supplements, and really, you know, psychology, really like learning more about my psyche and my wounding, and you know, learning more about the esoteric stuff that had actually triggered the breakdown initially, like all this stuff about the Illuminati and aliens and, you know, demons and all this stuff that you know is very existentially heavy. I ended up exploring all that stuff to a great degree until I felt like I had a handle on it. And it really took me a decade, you know, I mean, that's not small stuff we're talking about. It did take me, at least I would say, it took me about almost 3 years before I started to feel like I was getting my mind back a little bit. Those first 3 years were just pure agony, pure torture, panic, you know, just me having a very difficult time with reality. But around 2013, I met a shaman who really helped me. And that really changed the whole game. You know, she just delved into my soul and teased things apart, and showed me where I was really sabotaging myself. And so, yeah, I mean, year after year, I would learn a little bit more. I would try, you know, I would try a few new modalities and a few new diets. And over time, I just started to get a better handle on everything. And about 6 years in, that's when it became really clear that things were going to be okay. You know, I was still suffering a lot, but it was like, you know, we're gonna make it out of this. And then, you know, 8 or 9 years in, that's more recently, that's when my life has started to really open up more. I've started to feel like I'm functioning at a very high level. I still have, you know, a fair amount of trauma that I'm working through. That will continue, I think, for years. And anybody who you know, pretends otherwise, who pretends that they can just, you know, heal all of it in a few years or something. I mean, I just don't think that's very realistic, especially when you're talking about a severe psychiatric, you know, breakdown. It can really do a number on your nervous system. So yeah, so like really 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago, I decided, actually, we're coming up on the 3-year anniversary here. I decided it was time to start sharing what I've learned with the world. And helping other people who are really stuck, because there are millions of them. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
this is by no means something that people are figuring out very quickly. If anything, it seems to be getting worse. You know, the figures for psychiatric illness, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, sometimes I don't think of it as an illness. I think of it purely as a kind of development process. If we
Mhm.
were to you know, approach it in the right fashion, it would organically help us discover ourselves, basically. So yeah, I whatever we want to call it, it
Yep.
seems to be getting worse. You know, the stresses that we all experience seem to be intensifying. It's a very, you know, uh, very psychoactive time on the planet. It's just like,
Mhm.
you know, I'm sure you can relate with that. Um,
Definitely.
yeah.
So what you know, I guess one thing, you know, that comes to mind is I think for people who maybe resonate, you know, I think there are a lot of people who could resonate with your work and the sort of theory behind it, and it doesn't have to be specific towards the diagnosis of schizophrenia, right? Like, I mean, people have anxiety, panic attacks, depression, you know, bipolar, all of these different things that seem like all of these different uh, ailments. And from your perspective, you know, through your experience and maybe, you know, what you've learned since, do you feel like these things are more on a spectrum than they are like multiple different, you know, uh, conditions or whatever?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was well said. Um, I actually, you know, chose the name Sacredphrenia for my business partly because I was attempting to disrupt the conventional narrative that these diagnoses or these labels are set in stone. You know, it's like it. There's a bit of a trickster quality to the name Sacredphrenia. It takes the you know, um, it takes half of uh, the diagnosis and it transmutes it. And in a similar sense, we could transmute any diagnosis, or we could say that they all bleed into each other. I think they certainly do. I mean, oftentimes the diagnosis you get depends on, you know, what the weather is like outside and how the psychiatrist is feeling that day,
Mm.
and you know what you told them or what you decide to tell them. Um, I recognize that you know, it's a it's kind of a precarious thing. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is to disrupt the overall psychiatric narrative. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily confined to schizophrenia. And in many ways, I feel like I don't actually relate with schizophrenics as much as I thought I did. You
Mm.
know, I've worked with a number of them over the last year to a year and a half, and certainly we have shared many things in common. But at times, I have recognized, oh, I may slightly have more in common with people in this other group than I do with people, you know, purely in the schizophrenia land. Um,
Yep.
but I think we all have things to teach each other. I'm actually considering slightly expanding beyond the schizophrenia like micro niche,
Hmm.
in terms of, if you look at it you know, from a business standpoint. I'm thinking of branching out a little bit and making this more about what's called spiritual emergence. You might be
Mm.
familiar with that term. It comes from it really comes out of like Stanislav Grof, who used the term spiritual emergency to describe people who have these breakdowns, especially if there is a major spiritual component, which I think there is in most cases. I mean, if you consider that we're spiritual beings, then everything is
Yeah.
spiritual. So
Right. It's unavoidable, really.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, you know, jumping back to putting the focus, back more specifically onto, schizophrenia, or at least your version of what was diagnosed as schizophrenia. Looking back on it now, and also, in juxtaposition to the other folks that you have worked with, and just in your research in general, like what do you feel like is, and I guess now it can be broader than schizophrenia as I'm saying this, but what do you feel is the sort of, um, what are the deeper reasons that these things come to be? So if it's not just um, a physical brain disorder, some genetic thing where wires got crossed and looks like that's how you are now for the rest of your life and you have to take a medication. If that's not true, then what is the cause? What are the reasons why someone might encounter an experience like this? And, what are the things that help? I know you mentioned a little bit, but like, what are the sort of ways that people move through these things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. And it had multiple facets to it. So let me see if I can address each one. And if I don't, be sure to raise whichever one I didn't. But I mean, one reason that I did pick the title Sacredphrenia for my business, and that has been the main concept I've been focusing on, is because in many ways, what's clinically called schizophrenia is or tends to be one of the most extreme psychiatric so-called disorders. And so it gets focused on in the psychiatric world a lot for that reason, because the people experiencing it oftentimes are suffering, indescribable pain. And also because it's so extreme, you can actually, like, in a way, you can study it more easily than other states of consciousness, because it's so in your face. It's like this guy is, screaming about being a psychedelic chicken or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
it's and in many ways you can't study it because it's so far removed from what we're experiencing, but it's so stark in its presentation. So um I think I think there are some things that separate, so-called schizophrenia from other uh, diagnoses. One of them is that there seems to be a kind of a regression that occurs when a person suffers this kind of breakdown, where it's almost like they lose their selves so much, they lose their egos, that they end up receding into their childish mind, like their actual it almost in its very extreme forms, they can almost enter a kind of second infancy, where they're like a baby once again, and they're swimming in this sea of archetypes and images that normally we don't have access to when we develop a strong ego. So I think psychosis in general does have oftentimes at least, it has a kind of a regressive quality. Um, and so if it's particularly intense, where a person, like, in a way, they're going back in time, they're going back to their childhood wounding, and they're processing it through visions or auditory experiences. um, I mean, it can present itself in so many different ways. It's rather broad, so sometimes it's a little bit hard to talk about. But I think in all of these cases, whether it's in the form of extreme regression, psychosis, or it's simply some anxiety that's coming up, or some depression, or some type of pestering, annoying symptom that a person doesn't want to experience because they just want to be present in the world. I think in all these cases, it is the deep mind attempting to heal itself. And that's very counterintuitive, because you would think, well, if it's trying to heal itself, why doesn't it make my life better? Why doesn't it, why doesn't it just instantly improve my sociability, or my clarity of mind, or something
Yeah.
like that, my creativity? In so many of these cases, it does the opposite. It pulls you away from society. It makes you awkward, and you know it plunges you into these like difficult states that nobody wants to be in. But I've discovered that really is the soul attempting to initiate you into something much larger that you would never find if you were going along living a very comfortable life.
Yeah.
None of us would decide to embark upon a decade-long healing journey if we didn't have to. You really have to be like forced into it. And so that, to me, that's the presence of soul. Like that soul is something that guides you, along a, a large amount of um, space and time. Like it's not something that you can just conjure up in a weekend seminar or something like that. So I look at these people who are experiencing these extreme states of consciousness. I look at them as being very soulful people. They are, and partly because they have temporarily lost their egos, their strong, uh, senses of self, their individuation. They're more subject to the flow of soul, and so we have a need to approach them with more spiritual understanding, more spiritual care. We can't just look at it purely mechanically. Surely there is a mechanical component. I mean, it's silly to think that we would inhabit bodies that would undergo these profound experiences that are spiritual, and that there wouldn't be a physical component taking place. Like, so at the same time as I don't accept the dopamine hypothesis, for instance, regarding schizophrenia, in other words, I don't think that it's purely dopamine driven. I don't think it's purely neurochemical driven. I do think that there's a neurochemical component to it. Of course, we have brains. Obviously, the brain is involved with Sacredphrenia or any of these things. But yeah, purely approaching it from a brain standpoint does not seem to be effective. I mean, I do accept that a person can benefit from some temporary numbing. Like I've definitely softened on that in the past. I used to be so anti-psychiatry that like I would never accept a person taking medication if they had to. That's just not realistic. A lot of people are in a very bad place, and they don't have access to these different holistic modalities.
Yeah.
And so they might need to take an antipsychotic temporarily, and oftentimes it can help stabilize them to the point where they can continue their work. But I think they do need to eventually, face the fact that this is a wounding, and I didn't actually say that quite right. This is a response to a wounding.
Yeah.
And so the underlying core needs to be addressed, and that can be done through so many different means, and we can talk about that. I know that was part of your question, is like, how does a person do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So like, I mean, maybe you could start with, I know you briefly mentioned you met a shaman. I'm just curious what did that look like, and what are the other forms of healing that kind of brought you to where you're at? Um, yeah, I guess I'll start with that.
mhm. Yeah, I'll start with the shaman because it's just such a good story and it ties in with, the shamanic angle that I've taken. I mean, the tagline for the business right now is shamanic, not sick.
Mm,
Um, so essentially saying that this person isn't sick, they're shamanic, or I've even said at times they're shaman sick. So they,
mm,
they are sick in a certain sense, but not in the sense that you would expect. Not sick like they have a brain disease like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or something like that.
yeah,
Not to say that Alzheimer's, doesn't have a spiritual component to it. I just think it's different. That's a little more biochemical, a little more um, nuts and bolts.
right.
Something has been degrading inside the brain for decades.
Right. Yeah. Before you continue, it made me think of the uh, Krishnamurti quote, I think it is, that I really love, the something about um, it's no measure of wellness to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, or something
Right.
along those lines.
Right. Yeah, it's no measure of good health to be profoundly or to be well adjusted to profoundly sick society, right?
Yeah, and really it seems like, and I don't want to get too far off the rails here because I want to hear your continuation of that, but it just, I can't help but, as you're saying this, just think of all these different things: schizophrenia, autism, you know, autoimmune conditions. Like, all of these things are like, as we have symptoms in our own individual bodies that are trying to tell us when things are out of balance, those symptoms also manifest collectively as various different conditions that continue to rise to the surface and beg our attention to problems, to imbalances.
Mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, I just felt compelled to throw that in, I guess. But
Mm.
continue, please.
Yeah. No, I love that you did that. And early on in this conversation, I said that our generation's a little bit constitutionally weaker than the previous. That's a blessing in many ways. I mean, that is a chance for a more collective initiation. The more people that get sick, the more of an opportunity we have to address the underlying conditions that caused the sickness in the first place. So I think it is a blessing in disguise. As much as it sucks, as much as we don't, want to
Mm,
to experience any of that. So yeah, to go back to the shaman, um, I met her when I was working in a health food store. So I started working in a health food store part time, which is the most I was able to manage. That was in my early years when I was still really suffering, but still able to do certain, like, I don't want to paint the image of myself that I was so sick I was lying in bed all the time. You know, there are some people like that. There are some people who are in a mental hospital and they are just completely incapacitated all the time. And I mean, like, they have a harder road than any of us. They certainly have a harder road than I had. I had a hard road, but I still was able to, like, show up at this health food store, 20 hours a week. He knew there was something awry, you know, for me, but it was very good for me to have something that I could focus on. It gave me grounding, and so yeah, I met so many amazing people through that store, and I think that's part of what healing is all about: is community and meeting random healers who guide you down this path, and then
mhm.
you meet this other person. And so, I mean, meeting that shaman was like, um, definitely, a result of me deciding to take my healing, head on. So I met her in that health food store, and the events surrounding that meeting were so impossible. I mean, she had somehow gotten landlocked in Nevada. She didn't plan to be in Nevada. I won't go into all the details, but she'd kind of gotten stuck here, and so ended up, being in this little small town health food store randomly, and we ended up striking up a really great conversation, and it just took off from there. I mean, she took a real interest in me, and she realized that I had these gifts, and I had these difficulties, and that it would be very, it would be really a good thing for her to take me under her wing, and to do some real healing and some teaching as well. But I mean, she spent months with me, and she just would pry my psyche open and jump into it. She'd journey inside of me, psychically, and she would discover all of these different traumas I had. And I mean, she was like a true shaman. I mean, the word shaman gets thrown around so often these days, and unfortunately, I think it's kind of getting a bad rap, because a lot of, very unqualified people are claiming to be shamans. Yeah, I think there's some truth to that skepticism, that's out there right now. But there are some really, good shamans. I mean, she didn't even ask me to pay her or anything. I can't claim to be that selfless myself. I mean, I've been asking for people to pay me. Not that I'm a shaman, but when I do healing work, I usually expect to be compensated for it, financially. This woman did it purely out of the goodness of her heart. I still can't I still can't even, believe that she did that. But I really did start to turn a corner around that time. I did start to get a sense that things were going to be okay. I discovered a number of other, modalities, some of them chemical, like I discovered something called orthomolecular therapy, which is where you take large doses of certain vitamins. And there's a lot of evidence that people with Sacredphrenia, as I call it, that they are severely depleted of certain nutrients, partly just from all the stress. I mean, when you're in that adrenaline state for so long, it just starts to burn through your nutrients. So like niacin, for instance, vitamin B3, it, interestingly enough, it tends to neutralize adrenaline. So if you take enough niacin when you're in an adrenalized state, it can really level you out. It can really calm you down. That was like the closest thing I ever found to being able to take like an antipsychotic, which would just like chill you the fuck out, Niacin, and then CBD oil to a certain extent also had that effect on me. I didn't discover that until much later. But I mean, CBD, for the right person, it can also have an antipsychotic quality to it. So it can be really useful. But yeah, like I continued to explore shamanism myself in my own way. I never got like officially initiated as a shaman or anything like that. I mean, I don't claim to be a classic shaman, but I do consider myself shamanic in the sense that I do partake in the other side. If I attempt to journey, if I, listen to some drum beats, or if I take a small amount of a psychedelic or something like that, I will definitely travel. And I think, I think in many ways we all are shamanic. I think we all have shamanic capacities. Some of us are a little more prone to that than others. I mean, certainly people who have the diagnosis of schizophrenia or a similar label, like I consider them shamanic. I think they're able to tap into the other side more readily than the average person.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because going back to what I said in the beginning, about this article I had read, a shamanic view of mental illness. It was all about a shaman walking through a mental hospital and just sort of being really disgusted by the way we treat, people experiencing these spiritual emergencies. And, I haven't, done a lot of research to verify this. I just remember it. But their whole kind of view in shamanic civilizations was that the people experiencing these types of things were sort of a shaman being born, and then needed to be sort of guided through this. It's almost like, just a sign that this person is meant to be a shaman. And really that flips the whole entire thing on its head. It goes from somebody being honestly some of the most exiled people in society, people that are just labeled as crazy and fucked up and all whatever types of things. Lots of times they're ended up living on the street, for most of their life, or locked in an institution, on pretty horrendous medications. There's just no real compassionate, holistic solution. Now it seems that there are some emerging people like you doing what you're doing. I hope there's more of them. But yeah, it really turns that on its head, and it, almost these people. I mean, shamans in those societies are some of the most, wise and intelligent folks there are, and they're, responsible for great amounts of healing and wisdom and all of these different things. So it really resonates with me, and the more research that I've done about trauma and all of these things. I don't know how familiar you are with internal family systems, but Richard Schwartz from Internal Family Systems, and I apologize to people who listen to this podcast regularly because I don't think there's an episode that goes by that I don't bring it up, but it's just, he has a similar view of a non-pathologizing interpretation of all these different things, and really when it comes down to it, his sort of understanding is that they all sort of stem from trauma, and it sounds like you would agree with that.
I would. Yeah, in fact, I didn't mention that when you asked me about the causes of sacredphrenia. Certainly there is ample evidence by now, even in the mainstream psychiatric world, it's accepted that there's a huge childhood trauma component of whatever we want to call it, sacredphrenia. And I love internal family systems. I don't know it super well. I mean, I was introduced to it by a friend of mine about a year ago, and I was able to experience a session, and I saw how it would be very, very integrating. Like you're essentially dialoguing with your different parts, and you discover which parts are behind certain thought patterns that you have and certain emotional tendencies that you have, and you make peace with them. I mean, you basically allow them to commune with each other until they're able to hash out what they need to, like at a family, a heated family Thanksgiving where everybody's arguing about politics or whatever. Like you can do that inside, and like, many of these different parts have their own agendas. They have their own, you could even call them like political agendas. So yeah, I love that you mentioned IFS. Anybody listening, of course, I encourage them to dive into that. And I actually direct that comment toward myself, as much as anybody. I want to explore it a lot more. But to address what you were saying about the shamanic view of mental illness, I mean, that's a famous article, the one that you're addressing. I was really happy when I saw that going viral. I'd already come to accept that there was a shamanic, a major shamanic aspect to many of these conditions. So it wasn't like revelatory for me in quite the same way. And I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, and I don't want to, ruin that profound experience you had of reading that article. I do think that sometimes it can get a little bit romanticized. Whoever wrote that article, I'm so glad that has been making the rounds. I mean, my God, it's so needed. And that's in many ways what I've been trying to do myself. But I just think we also just need to be careful not to over romanticize it. Like I've actually, in the last year, I've been reading a bit more about what these initiations look like in indigenous societies. So we have this Facebook version of like what these initiations look like, and it's very rosy. It's like, oh, well, they, a person who has, starts hearing voices, for instance, they're just pulled aside, and they are put through a series of rites of passage, and like, bang, before you know it, they're like a full-fledged shaman. I think that's a bit Disney-fied. I think like we miss out on the stories of the people who start hearing voices in indigenous societies, and they don't become shamans. In many cases, they get rejected from those societies because they're too big a burden upon those societies, especially if they start to become dangerous. I mean, obviously, that's something that we face in this society as well, and it's a major question we have to ask ourselves. In some ways, it's what's been creating the stigma and the lack of forward progress, because there are these cases where people hear voices telling them to kill other people, or in the case of the indigenous cultures, like burn down the village or whatever. And sometimes that does happen, and sometimes they don't know how to cure those people, and they will actually go to Western psychiatrists to get some fucking medication to, like,
Right.
put a damper on this thing. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of balance the story a little bit. That's what I've been. There's a great book called Shamans Among Us that goes more into detail about the shamanic theory of schizophrenia. And interestingly, it was written by an atheist. So if you definitely want a more grounded perspective on shamanism, that he's the guy to provide it, because he doesn't even believe in spirit or anything like. But he does recognize that there's a kind of a shamanic role that these people, in many cases, did enter. Like, if they did have a breakdown, of course, in so many cases, they would become a shaman, and that person would be very well respected in society, as you say. And it is so ironic. It's like, from the lowest rungs of society, in our case, to, in their case, like becoming the most important member of society, becoming the person who guides that society, and cures people, and divinates, and like, makes the weather, and what other functions? I mean, God, they have so many functions. In many ways, the function of a shaman in many of these societies is political. So they're making many political decisions. They're deciding what tribe to ally themselves with, and which tribes are they should go to war with, or, I mean, really big decisions. And of course, the reason for that is because they're more spiritually focused. So they have the sense that spirit is going to provide the the orders, you know, directing that society, and it's going to come through the person who has the most open channel. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I mean, yeah, I think in a lot of different cases, whether it's, you know, spirituality and politics or agriculture or whatever it might be, there is a tendency to romanticize indigenous societies, cultures, because we have lost something very important, many things, you know, many very important things from our, you know, historical context of agricultural practices and different forms of, you know, communal living and, you know, shamanistic practices and all of these different things. Like, I think we're more and more starting to wake up to the fact that we have lost these important things that need to be reintegrated into our civilization. And I think the instinct is to think that not to think, but just to have the feeling of like, if we could just go back, like we just need to be like we were back then because we had it figured out. But it's more of like reintegrating those things we lost with our current understanding and coming to like a whole new thing where the future and the past is, you know, sort of combined. So I do appreciate that. I also wonder, you know, you said some of these people are coming to Western folks for medicine, and I am not in any way trying to say that, again, that, you know, pre-Western civilization, that there was none, you know, none of these cases where people couldn't, you know, didn't know what to do with these folks having these issues. But I wonder, as time has gone on, how much of, even in some of these indigenous cultures, you know, these things get a little bit more complicated. You know what I'm saying? Like, as time goes on, maybe they lose certain you know, they're also losing certain aspects of their cultural connection and all of these things. So
Good point. Right.
But, you know, one of the things I wonder, what your, you know, your sort of perspective is on, and I'm sure there's plenty of more stuff that maybe we'll end up getting back into, but I'm really curious to know, you know, how you're seeing what's playing out on a global scale right now, because obviously there are a lot of interesting things going on, whether it's COVID, Donald Trump, this whole Q phenomenon, the rise in conspiracy theories, both accurate ones and ones that we have no idea about, and ones that obviously probably seem to be exaggerated or false. There's just all, you know, rise in censorship and totalitarianism. There's all of these different things in the mix right now that I feel like people are, you know, some people have sort of been awake to a lot of these things for a while. Some people are realizing a lot of this stuff for the first time. You know, like in the context of sort of a spiritual emergency, doesn't it feel a little bit like that we're starting to sort of have a collective one at the moment? I don't know. I guess I don't have a real specific question, but I'm just wondering if you could riff on what's going on in the world right now.
Totally. Oh my God, it would be my pleasure. I mean, in many ways, that's what the ultimate aim of Sacredphrenia is to not simply help people move through their individual passages, their individual rites of passage, but to help our planet do it, because we are going through a kind of planetary schizophrenia. I mean, there's a real breakdown in our overall sense making happening right now, where people don't know what to believe, they don't know what's real. I mean, this is happening on a collective level, and it's really concerning, because if you have a culture or numerous cultures that have this exponential technology, meaning like they are able to impact ecosystems, you know, they actually are a kind of apex predator species, and they don't know what is up or what is down, what is right or what is left. I mean, that doesn't end well. Like we really do need to we really do need to come to a place of wholeness as a species. This isn't something that some of us individually just get to do and everybody else can kind of just keep skating by. Like, we all need to do this. And my idea, it's not actually my idea, it's an idea that many other people have had and that I'm picking up, is that many of these people who go through these individual spiritual emergence processes, they are actually the ones who classically provide the myths that allow a culture to navigate precarious times. Like this is actually what these people are there to do. In many ways, that's what a shaman does. A shaman provides the myths that help a tribe decide what to do next. I mean, a shaman has an artistic component to him or her, and so in some ways, I've been having to make the decision whether I'm going to keep Sacredphrenia more about, the psychiatric component on an individual level, or if it's going to be more about the larger scale, like how do we help people go through initiations on a mass level, because that's really what's needed. I mean, I want to activate these people individually, because the more of these shamans we activate, I think the more there's a great ripple effect, because these people, like, they have a great psychic weight to them, that their morphic resonance, as some people call it, is like possibly more impactful than others. Not to say that everybody's not powerful, we all are powerful, but because some of us have more of that, like, transliminality, that ability to go in and out of this dimension, in a sense, I just think it's very important for those of us who have that capacity to be initiated, but not simply for the sake of initiation. It has to be for the sake of planetary healing. I mean, that's what this is all about. So, like, yeah, we're going through the ringer right now. And I mean, my sense is that with 2020, we saw the beginning of a new era in which things do not operate according to the old ways of being. Like, I think you have a sense of what I mean. It seems like we were operating according to business as usual until very recently, and we're still operating according to business as usual, but, like, most people have a sense that we can't continue to do that, because the planet can't sustain that. I mean, something's got to give.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, those are just some of my initial thoughts. Like, I'm very concerned by things like QAnon having such a say in our politics, for instance. But I'm also actually encouraged by such developments. I mean, it's very paradoxical, and you probably can relate with that too. Charles Eisenstein, who you had on your show, I mean, he's really great at expressing that, how it is terrifying, and it's also reassuring.
I think, like, and I have a real hard time, like, communicating with people around the subject, people that sort of don't share that feeling of, sort of that paradoxical feeling of, like, realizing that there is some sort of, or at least in my opinion, and yours as well, it sounds like that there is some sort of silver lining to that type of I'll call it an awakening to some extent, for a lack of a better term. I've always had the feeling, without really even digging a whole lot into it, but I've always had the feeling just in my gut that Q is some sort of like a psychological operation, really, in some capacity. Like there's enough truth mixed in for it to resonate with people, but there's enough disinformation there to really kind of confuse people and pit people against each other.
Right.
But to me, just the fact that so many folks are getting interested in it, and really feeling like alarmed by it and triggered by it, and I don't mean the people who don't buy into Q. I mean the people who are into Q. They're obviously being triggered by these things like child pedophile rings and all of these different things. They're at least they're starting to become aware that there's something deeper going on here, that that the things that we've been told through the mainstream media for decades has been largely propaganda and brainwashing tactics and manipulation,
Right.
on the behalf of various different corporations. And so, it's tough. There, I know that there is certain dangers to conspiracy theories, and there are plenty that aren't real. But I struggle when people seem to feel that things like QAnon are the biggest challenges that we face, when really it's sort of like I haven't come up with a great analogy for this yet, but it's almost like the the thing Jesus said about before you try to remove the splinter from somebody else's eye, remove the log from your own, or whatever. And when you look at the types of the amount of propaganda that we are fed through the mainstream media, and not only the intentional propaganda, but also the unintentional propaganda, or just the agreed upon things in our society uh, that are so disconnected from nature and from like the true harmony of reality, like the birthing practices, and just the living in boxes, houses as boxes. And I'm not explaining this real great, but
No, you are.
but you know, I think that the the lies and the illusions and the propaganda that is right in our face every day, 24/7, especially for people who do consume mainstream media, um, is so it's almost like hidden in plain sight, that it's so intense that something like QAnon seems just unbelievable. But really, it's almost like the same dynamic inside a person. Like QAnon is a symptom of a deeper issue. And one of those deeper issues is the fact that like our news media has been completely captured by corporations for decades, and it's almost never really been truly like reliable, factual news source for the most part.
Right.
And so I rambled there for quite a while, but I don't know if any of that resonated or or made much sense. But
Yeah, no, it did. Yeah, it did resonate. I I mean, I think for me, the conspiracy theory uh, culture really it strikes a certain chord because of my own experiences. Because as I mentioned earlier in the show, I had a kind of breakdown that took place as a result of diving into some of that stuff.
mhm,
I mean, and we see in my case how that served a higher function when it was allowed to play out, when it was allowed to breathe and experience enough years of soul searching. It did result in a healing. And so I look at QAnon and think similarly, that while it is distorted and while it is concerning in many ways, it has the potential to be healing, because people are pulling away, as you've been mentioning. They've been pulling away from the the standard narrative, which doesn't serve us. It can't continue. It has to be disrupted somehow. And I think oftentimes that has to happen through a narrative that is very disturbing, whatever is going to shake people up, like shake them out of their business as usual. And so in some ways, I think it had to be something that wasn't true. Like, I don't look at QAnon as being all that truthful. Of course, as you mentioned, there are aspects of truth. There are aspects of truth in everything. Any good cult has, 70% truth, 30% disinformation.
Right.
And it's no different with QAnon. And of course, there is horrible shit we don't know about taking place in Hollywood and in, of course there's a cabal of a certain sort that does very nefarious things. I mean, no doubt. I don't for a second doubt that there are sex trafficking rings to a certain extent, but I think the real version of QAnon is a lot less sensational than those people would maybe care to believe. Like, it wouldn't make quite the story that they want, which, they want to sink their teeth into something so disturbing. It has to involve adrenochrome, and little kids are being tortured and eaten alive and all this stuff. It's like, that's where it gets into Sacredphrenia territory for me, where these people are almost like partaking in a sometimes I call it a myth world. Like, when you fully immerse yourself in a myth world, you have departed from consensus reality to the point where you are in another universe, and that can serve a function. Like I've been saying, that can, as long as you eventually return to society, that's what doesn't happen in a lot of cases. And I'm afraid if there isn't some major intervention, a lot of these QAnon people are just going to continue down that pike, and they're not going to get pulled back. So there is a need for some of us who have traveled some of that terrain to reach in and say, look, I mean, I know it's tempting. I know it's attractive, or it's whatever it is, disturbing, whatever gets you off on it. Like, you got to come back eventually, or it doesn't serve any good.
Yeah. And I think, I like what you said about, things being allowed to play out, because that's something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, especially with the censorship issues coming up lately. I just personally feel like, throughout different experiences in my life, like when I said I mentioned I worked at group homes earlier in the conversation, working with people who had developmental disabilities and mental illness, a lot of really people in crisis and violent people that would threaten me with objects like broken chunks of plates, or, just call me vicious names. As I went on in my career doing that stuff, I realized the more that I displayed trust in that person, even if they seemed like they shouldn't be trusted, the more that I realized, like, they don't want to hurt me. They don't actually want to hurt me. They don't actually feel this way about me. They need somebody to really hold space for them to do their worst, you know what I mean? Like, and show them, like, I'll still be here. And I realized that as I, did that for them, allowed them to say, you're a fucking piece of shit, I want to kill you, and holding a chunk of plate, and I didn't react to it. And I said, okay, I hear you. I'm sorry that you're upset. And they noticed that, they didn't tell me to stop. They didn't run away. They didn't call the cops. They stood there, and now they're still here, and we can have dinner together later and watch a movie. Like, that was a form of healing for them. And, any time that some sort of intervention took place in fear to try to stop that behavior, or to try to, redirect it, even lots of times, really just sort of intensified the behavior because that person needed someone to be present and to just like hold space for what they were going through. And so obviously it's not an apples to apples comparison, but part of me just feels like it's a universal sort of theme that the more that we can trust, like, hey, these people are on a journey, they're going through something. Yes, there's a lot of chaos in the world right now, and various different groups of people are, acting out in chaotic ways for various different reasons, Q just being one of those groups. And if we can sort of like try to find that deep internal trust that like this process will unfold naturally for the betterment of humanity and they will come out the other side, that there's a better chance that they will than if we just try to stop them from talking about it, shame them, etc. I don't know what you think of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely learned by now, working with many of these people, that it's much more effective to be with them in whatever dark state they may be in, whether that is dark in its whether it's them being anxious, or them possibly being angry at the world, or even in some cases having some violent thoughts or something like that. Unfortunately, again, there's so much stigma around that, and many people have the perception that it's very common for people to want people experiencing psychosis or schizophrenia, for instance, to want to hurt other people. It's actually quite rare. I mean, the figures show that people with uh, this condition tend to be more harmful toward themselves than other people, and they're more likely to be hurt by other people than to actually hurt other people. And so, I've definitely been challenged at times when I work with some of these people myself, um, and wanting to simply like snuff it out, like whatever the suffering is, just find a way to numb it or to silence it, so that we can go back to living our peaceful lives. And I find that doesn't tend to work. Like you're saying, like it tends to come out some other way. It tends to seep out through the cracks if you don't allow it to come up organically, naturally, the way it wants to be expressed. And so sometimes that can be kind of explosive, but there can be a healthy explosion. There can be, and I think if we had more spaces for people to express themselves in a healthy fashion through art or through communal dialogue, or whatever it is, even going out into nature and just screaming or something, I think we would see less of the imbalanced expressions. Yeah. And so, and one other thing I wanted to say about that is that, I mean, oftentimes the person who is experiencing these strange symptoms, as you pointed out, they're looking for acceptance, and they're looking for trust, and in some ways, those may be things they did not experience earlier in life. I mean, again, there's a regression that can take place, and so they can be reenacting their childhood and expecting a different response. And if it's not given, then they're going to continue looking for it. So they're going to continue to provoke situations that would possibly end differently than they did originally. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I actually recently, I can't remember who it was now. I wish I could, because I would love to be able to, guide people towards where it was. But I was listening to something about trauma, and that was actually, I don't know if it was Peter Levine or somebody did some type of research, and there was this story about a war veteran who kept robbing this convenience store. He did it like 4 or 5 times or something, and
Mhm.
by the end of it, they realized like, oh, he had had this certain situation where his partner got killed or whatever happened. He was trying to reenact this scenario so that he could do the thing that he wasn't able to do in that scenario to sort of close that trauma loop.
Mhm.
And a lot of these things that I've learned about trauma, they start to become so, you know, so the ways that unhealed trauma manifests in our day-to-day lives is so dramatic and seems to be a lot of times like larger than life, especially in the case of something like Sacredphrenia. I mean, there's all these different uh you know sort of can be supernatural or whatever different types of things that come along with it, to where like sometimes when you hear about the some of the people that are really doing research about trauma leading to all of these different ailments, it really seems to be so practical when you break it down, and like so biological. Like really, it's an animal's
Right.
survival response, and it
Right.
seems to be a lot of these things, even with something like uh, Sacredphrenia, is in some sense some sort of survival response, and it's a human trying to adapt,
Right.
to some type of trauma that was never able to be resolved.
Very true. Yes.
Um,
True, man.
yeah, but going back to sort of like current events and QAnon and all of this stuff, I really love what you said about the sort of that it's these initiates. Part of their role is to sort of create the myths for people to sort of, maybe to ground the new paradigm as it emerges, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, I really resonate with that idea, and it feels true to me. So what do you think are some of those myths that are being created by someone such as yourself and maybe others that you identify with as part of like a community? Like what sort of myths do you see emerging right now that are going to be sort of helpful in,
Mm.
um, you know, grounding some sort of new paradigm?
Wow, that is a good question.
Thank you.
That's one that I'm gonna have to answer, you know, uh, as it arises in the next, minute, because
Hmm.
I'm not exactly sure that the myths exist yet, but they might. Um, at least in their early forms, they might be taking shape. But I'm concerned that we're not actually we're not seeing them, and that might be one reason we're having such a hard time navigating this craziness. Um, and I gotta be honest, like one reason I've been thinking of at least temporarily suspending the more psychiatric focus of Sacredphrenia. And well, one reason for that is that at the end of the day, I'm not a psychiatrist. I feel more comfortable hanging out in the spiritual spaces than I do in the psychiatric spaces. And
Hmm.
so there are multiple reasons for me considering moving beyond um, helping individual people like navigate their chemical and psychological passages into more of a possible space of creating myth myself, like
Hmm.
because I have a proclivity for this myself. I enjoy disrupting narratives myself, and that's one reason I created Sacredphrenia. It was kind of like a big fu to psychiatry and to the wider world. Like, you think I have schizophrenia? Fuck you. I've got Sacredphrenia.
Yeah.
Um, and like in some ways, it's after 2 years, it's lost a little bit of its steam for me, at least. I still am wedded to Sacredphrenia, uh, you know, I always will be. It's an eternal concept, and it's something that we need. We need to transmute the stigma, but again, I don't know if it does enough. Like the ultimate aim is to create a myth myself, or to be part of a myth creation process, maybe connecting with others. I think one of the best examples you might see of a new myth being created would be from somebody like J.P. Sears. Not that he has created the new myth, but you're familiar with J.P. Sears?
Oh yeah,
the redheaded guy. He's very effective in his comedy, because it taps into something that people want, which is to see traditional media done in a new fashion. So it's kind of like he hijacks media the way it's normally done. He'll pretend to be a newscaster or an anchor, and he will put an entirely different spin on today's topics. And I don't actually agree with a lot of what he puts out. I think he's taken a turn recently toward the right wing that makes me a little uncomfortable. Not that I'm a total left wing guy myself, but I think he had to become polarizing, which a lot of these people have to do at a certain point. If they're going to really grow their audiences, they have to kind of pick a side and like just and commit themselves to that. But I think that's one example of a kind of a myth. Charles Eisenstein talks about, the new story. I think that is the best model for what needs to be created. There's the old story of separation, which involves people believing that they're all separate and we live in a material world consisting of particles bouncing around, and there's no inherent consciousness. This is all just some big accident. And if you get sick, you're fucked and you're going to die soon. It's a very limiting story. And in many ways, it's what has driven the collapse of the planet. If we had a more living story, a more living myth that essentially told us that everything is inherently connected and imbued with consciousness, and everything that I do affects everything else and everybody else, that would go a long way. In fact, that would do all of it. If we all instantly partook in that myth, it would take a matter of weeks before we would start seeing the planet mending. That's my sense. And so the question is, how do you implant that story into people's minds? You do need something very disruptive. That's why I think something in the J.P. Sears style, but taken to a much further level and informed by the right philosophies. I don't think one person can do it. I think there are going to be some important figures who arise who do impact the culture, and possibly they'll connect with each other and they'll play off of each other. Maybe we'll all do it together. I mean, we are all one big fluid organism. So I don't know. Those are my initial thoughts, but I'm not too encouraged right now. I think we're behind the, what's the expression? We're behind the the ball.
Behind the 8 ball.
Behind the 8 ball. Right. Right.
Yeah, I think I might be a little bit more optimistic than you on this one. I feel like, and I don't know why exactly. Maybe partially from doing the podcast and just like the different things that I've gotten interested in and people I've connected with, where I feel like there is this sort of emergence of a set of values that feels pretty aligned, and it's certainly not happening on the mainstream level right now, but it's definitely seems to be growing in strength. I see people like I guess I I don't know how many names I could be. Just I don't want to do the name game. I guess I'd throw out a million of them. But
Right.
you know, things like regenerative agriculture, and I really resonate with spiral dynamics, and you know, things like internal family systems and different modes of trauma healing. You know, the MDMA therapy trials that are going on. Um,
Mhm.
it feels like there's this new, you know, and a lot of people, due to COVID stuff, it's really awakening this interest in sort of revisiting the whole entire concept of germ theory and how disease is sort of manifests and why it manifests, and sort of looking back to the origins of like terrain theory. I don't know how familiar you are with that sort of
Little bit.
debate, but
Right.
um, it just feels like there's this new, and Charles Eisenstein, like you said, I mean, I have so much respect for him, and just him, everything he does seems to be part of helping to, like, you know, guide
Oh yeah.
the energy towards this new story. And it really does feel like there is, at least from my perspective, and I'm sort of in a little bit of a, what do you call that? Echo chamber, I guess, to some extent, although I do try to challenge that by seeking out opposing views.
Hmm.
But yeah, it does seem like there is this sort of emergent set of values that could be pretty vital for the new paradigm, that include like understanding that intelligence is just in reality, you know, that nature is intelligent, your body is intelligent, you know,
Right.
your body has the capacity to heal itself. Things like viewing things holistically, the fact that everything is connected, like you're talking about, this concept of interbeing. Um, you know, so all those different things, they do give me optimism, but I
Oh yeah.
could also, you know, I could also convince myself to be pessimistic as well, though. It's just knowing how much some of these great things are just being scoffed at, you know, like some of the holistic healing and the idea that the body is intelligent, and that it, you know, has a relationship with viruses, you know, for the betterment of humanity, is really not adopted by the mainstream at all right now. So
Right.
um, there's definitely a long way to go, but
Yeah. I think you and I are on the same page. You know, absolutely. I have massive hope for humanity, and I'm very involved with all these circles that you're describing. I mean, they're why I'm here today. I wouldn't be here without them. So the fact that I'm having this conversation with you right now is proof that these growing networks are active and that they are doing good work and making discoveries that have never been made before. I mean, we're at the cutting edge of so many disciplines right now. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I have great hope for our culture and our species. I think I was mainly responding to your question about an actual myth, because I think that's a
mm,
little bit different than the existence of these different groups, which do
sure.
encourage me. I think they have yet to really, I think they have yet to propose an effective story that would allow the mainstream to come in more easily. And that's one reason I was referring to JP Sears, is because in some ways I feel like he's doing the opposite of what needs to be done. He's kind of
Mm,
like, he's like the Portlandia of the new age world. You know, he's
mm,
like ultra spiritual. So he's, in a way, he's giving, you know, the mainstream more fuel or more permission to make fun of the new age or consciousness, these things that are really necessary for planetary survival. They're not
yeah.
just like some niche thing. They're it. Like these are ancient ways of living and understanding ourselves. So like I think mainly what I was saying is that I just don't see like effective storytelling tactics that have arisen quite yet, and I think they are going to arise. But like we're doing very well at like figuring out what needs to be done, but we're not figuring out how to communicate that well with the outside world.
Mm,
Because right now, regenerative agriculture yeah, it's making leaps and bounds in its actual in the theory of it, and in
Yep.
the implementation of it on a small scale level. But we'd be fooling ourselves if we pretended that, you know, it's beginning to make even a dent in the larger economy. Like,
Right.
big agriculture, you know, makes it an absolute mockery of regenerative agriculture every year when they spray millions of gallons of pesticides on the, you know, the raw earth. I mean,
Yeah.
like, we're so far behind the eight ball in those types of ways. But you know, these things are arising, and I think they probably are right on schedule. And sometimes when really big things happen, you have to have a huge amount of pressure in order for the like one of my favorite quotes from Charles Eisenstein is that our salvation will come from the margins.
Mm.
So I think it's inevitable that these small pockets of society are going to you know, gather steam, and eventually they're going to break into the mainstream. But we're not even close to that right now. It could happen relatively fast, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it reminds, and thanks for the clarification. I guess, yeah, you're totally right that there's not really a whole. I mean, I would argue that Charles is sort of creating a myth with a lot of the things that he's doing. But yeah, I was more talking practically with the different things that are going on versus like an overarching story. Although
Right.
spiral dynamics, it's not a very like digestible myth probably for your average person. But I think there's probably a way. Are you familiar with that model
Yeah,
much?
yeah. I mean, I've been looking into it this year. I or last year. Don't I don't know it, you know, as deeply as I could. But yeah, I love the idea of first tier and second tier thinking or consciousness.
Mm.
You know, breaking into what is it, yellow and then
Yep.
teal. I
Mm.
mean, that, yeah. I and when you were talking about earlier about integrating old ways of living into
Mm.
a new form of consciousness, I was thinking of spiral dynamic. I know you interviewed, was it Steve McDonald
Yep.
on your channel about? I started listening to
Okay,
that
cool.
podcast. It was really good.
Thanks. Yeah, I would. Another thing that I mention on almost every podcast, but I'm really sort of in love with the model and would strongly encourage like anybody who's listening to this to check it out. And Steve is sort of the creme de la creme person out there right now, in my opinion, that's doing work around the model. Uh, there's probably a way to make it more of like a colorful story, versus just like analyzing. I mean, really, it comes from this dude's data of studying his sort of students. But really, it just tells the story one of the change process in general, that things break down as they're changing, and I think just that in general for people to understand is super important, and
Mhm.
we should all know that, but unfortunately, they don't really teach it in school necessarily. But also just that life itself is sort of always seems to be working towards like a higher order, or just like it's always trying to adapt to its level of complexity. It's increasing in complexity, but then it's also increasing in adaptation. So
Mhm.
I don't know where I'm going with this, but really, as you were stating earlier, I feel like I'm reminded of something you said earlier that as these symptoms of something like schizophrenia manifest during what's really sort of like an attempt at healing, you know, I feel like as a civilization and as a global civilization, we're kind of going through very similar thing that as things look like they're getting worse and worse, it's almost like that is the sign right there that we are healing and that something
Mhm.
better is on the horizon.
Right. Wow. So true. Yeah. Yeah, if things were remaining static, I would be more concerned. If we were still in 2019 territory in 2021, I'd be concerned. But the fact that 2020 happened and that it seems to be accelerating in some ways, 2021 seems like 2020 on steroids so far. I think we're looking pretty good. And yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned spiral dynamics. Rebel Wisdom is a channel that I'm really encouraged by. I don't know if you have taken part in Rebel Wisdom or seen any of their stuff.
I've heard the name, but I'm not too familiar with them.
Yeah, he's really congregating so many cutting edge thinkers who are at the forefront of their fields. And making sense of what's going on in the world in a way that seems, integrated and not like spiritual bypassing, I guess, which is what I see a lot of in some of these communities. I think his work is really informed by Carl Jung and shadow work and things like that. So it comes from a very grounded place. And yeah, so no, I think there is real hope. And yeah, I mean, your podcast is a part of it, man. I mean, this is just awesome what you're doing, and I'm honored
Thank
again to be on here. I mean, it's not exactly a meager list of guests that you've had. It's pretty impressive.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate that, man. And I feel the same about what you're doing. I mean, you are an example, obviously, that there is a new paradigm, and Sacredphrenia itself is, a new myth around these sort of breakdowns,
Mm.
And like I said, I really do think that the same sort of archetype applies to all emotional, psychological sort of dismantling processes,
Right.
And so like I just think what you're doing is great, and regardless of how you choose to proceed with Sacredphrenia or any other things, I know it will obviously contain the same energy and ethos. So really, I don't think it matters too much. But yeah,
Right.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come and have a chat with me. I mean, I know we could sit and go on and on. But yeah, I mean, is there anything that I didn't ask that you felt like would be really important to share or um
I think it might be interesting to just allow spirit to come through however spirit wants to come through right now. I've never really done that before on
mm,
one of these podcasts. I was even thinking about how, you know, before we went on the podcast, I was a little bit nervous as we can all get. And I was thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we started podcast with like a little prayer or something
mhm,
like that? Um, and I guess on some podcasts they might do that, but even just as a way to set the intentional tone for the conversation, I think it could be nice to say a little prayer right now. I mean,
sure.
I would love to to call on spirit right now to just come through in that way. um yeah, I would like to thank the ethers, thank spirit, thank God for bringing Jacob and I together. We share the same name, and
Mhm,
that can't be an accident. I think names can actually tell real stories in themselves. You know, Jacob
mhm,
and I, we're both climbing a ladder, that's for sure. And maybe it has a spiral shape to it. It's a spiral staircase. We're climbing it each in our own way, attempting to make sense of this crazy planet we live on during these crazy times, and and really finding the wisdom in that craziness. That's one of my favorite words that has come out of this alternative mental health community is the idea of crazy wisdom, the idea that we can really learn so much about ourselves when we lose ourselves, when we have to put ourselves back together. We end up more whole than we were in the first place. That's the whole goal. I know that's what Jacob is doing. Not saying that he is crazy or ever was crazy, but hey, we're all crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's been doing, and that's what I've been doing, and I love that we get to join forces at this time in our separate journeys. We get to link up, and our threads of wisdom extend out into the world and reach whoever they're meant to reach at this time. And so, yeah, I really just want to thank Spirit for drawing us together. Thank Christina Luna for mentioning my name during that podcast. That was a really fateful name drop. And she's an absolute treasure. I just adore her. So thank you for this very fruitful conversation, Spirit, and Jacob. Thank you for inviting me on. And we ask that you bless each of us going forward. We ask that you bless the listeners who have made it this far, or listen to any part of this conversation. Thank you for this truly blessed exchange.
That was awesome. I appreciate that, man. That was really nice. The visualization of the crazy wisdom sort of, spiraling a strand of DNA or something. That was really cool. So, where's the best place to connect with you for people who are interested in following along with what you're doing?
Mm-hmm. So they can go to my website, sacredphrenia.com. It's spelled SACREDPHRENIA.com. They can check me out on the typical social media channels. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, but I don't really ever use Twitter. Or they can email me at Jacob, Jacob, at sacredphrenia.com. And I love to hear from people. At times I get overwhelmed and a little burnt out when I get so many inquiries and comments and things. So I don't always respond to things right away. Sometimes it takes me time, but I usually do end up responding to everything. And so really would love to hear from anybody, or to connect with anybody out there who is suffering and could use a little bit of guidance. I mean, I don't claim to be a medical professional. You've
Right.
learned that about me by now. I act more as a kind of a coach who helps a person, devise their own strategy to step into their healing. But I don't claim to heal people or anything like that, of course. So I think that those are the main.
Well, until we have a real, serious adopting of your, this new paradigm view of, spiritual emergencies,
Right.
We need people that are just willing to go out on a limb and do some coaching and, understand that, they can't claim to be a psychiatrist or a doctor or whatever.
Right.
They've been through something, and they know that there's not a lot of resources out there for people to do it in a different way, So, thanks for what you're doing. I mean, I hope that, that whatever work that you do, this message kind of gets out to the people who need it, and they can find their way through these things without getting stuck in that sort of feedback loop of medications and, you know, hospitalizations. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And let me know when, I know you mentioned you're sort of kind of working on a course. You know, I don't know if you want people to know about that. If you're fine with it, I'll keep that in here, but definitely let me know when that's ready, and you know, we can have a chat again and stuff. So
Cool. Oh man, yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, this was such a good conversation. I feel like we should have future conversations that are
yeah.
recorded, and
Mhm.
maybe I'll have you come on, you know, when I have my own podcast, you know, you can come on.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a course in the works, you know, along with so many projects I have going right now. I mean to make it available eventually, mainly focused around diet, around
Mm,
how people can use food to mm, to temper their journey, you
yeah.
know, to have a more fluid uh, development process, so that
Mm,
they're not you know, being constantly aggravated by the wrong types of foods. And we're each bio individual when it comes to our eating, but
yeah.
certainly there are universal principles that apply to everyone, especially people in this category of
Mm,
suffering from psychiatric distress. So yeah, if you're looking
nice.
for that sometime in 2021. I'm not going to put an exact date on it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, man.